The box office predictions for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny continue to decline. They're getting worse and worse as we get closer to the release of this film. One analyst described it as abysmal and claimed the film could lose upwards of $250 million. Let's get into this. At the beginning of June, we had box office tracking website Box Office Pro predicted the film would have a domestic opening weekend between $81 million and $111 million. They predicted the film's entire domestic theatrical run would gross between $225 and $380 million. They claimed that the film was receiving positive social media chatter. I'm not really sure where they got that from, but that's what they said. They said that the film's nostalgia factor, families going to see it, and early pre-sales were respectable. However, they noted the film also had quite a bit of competition from Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, as well as Oppenheimer. Nevertheless, the outlet quickly started lowering its predictions for the film just a week later on June 8th. Their opening weekend estimates declined 17% to between $76 million and $105 million for the opening weekend, and then the total domestic run declined to $211 million to $359 million. A week later, their predictions declined again. This time, the opening weekend estimates declined 10.5% to between $68 million and $102 million. The total domestic run declined to between $211 million and $325 million. Another week passed and predictions fell again. They lowered them between $68 million and $95 million. So they lowered the top end of that, but kept the bottom end there. And then they lowered the total domestic actually stayed pat between $211 and $325 million. Interestingly, those estimates might actually be high. That estimate there, going back up $68 million and $95 million opening weekend, might actually be really high. We had the Hollywood Reporter in a report from June 8th predicted that the opening weekend would actually be between $60 million and $70 million. So $68 million would be on the high end of that, and that's Box Office Pro's low end. We just got a new information from Deadline where they shared their tracking number predictions, and they said that the film would have an opening weekend between $60 million and $65 million. So they're even going even lower, lowering that top end of the Hollywood Reporter from 70 to 65, obviously keeping the lower end there. And then they also shared what they predicted would be the global opening, which is $140 million worldwide, not just domestic. Interestingly, they also said the pre-sales for the film were under $6 million, which again calls into question Box Office Pro's previous assertion that pre-sales were doing well. They said that $6 million is below John Wick Chapter 4 and Fast 10. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I actually believe Fast 10 had higher pre-sales, but it actually ended up with a much lower opening weekend than John Wick Chapter 4. So pre-sales aren't the end-all, be-all when it comes to predicting the opening weekend. Certain films obviously will have more walk-up traffic, as they like to say. So I wanted to get back to the analyst, as I said at the top of this video, predicting that it could lose up to $250 million. That analyst is a good friend of the channel, OMB Reviews. He actually declared these predictions as abysmal and that the film was dead on arrival. He did some calculations here saying that if you have the typical 2.5 times the budget, the film would need to make $737 million to break even. If you want to maybe be a little bit more aggressive in your calculations, if you do a 3 times budget calculation, it would need to make upwards of $855 million just in order to break even. So then he did some more calculations based on the Deadline's $150 million opening weekend, and he kind of explains how usually you make... the vast majority of movies on average make about a third of their entire box office globally in their opening weekend. So if it's $140 million opening weekend, that would mean it'd have to be around $400 million to $450 million to kind of, that's what it would make. If you have $140 million opening weekend, the film would make between $400 and $450. So if you do that, if you then kind of like do some subtraction there, obviously factor in the 60% box office take for the Walt Disney Company. And he says that if it does $400 million overall, it could lose between $200 and $260 million for the Walt Disney Company. If it goes upwards and does maybe $500 million at the box office, it could lose between $142 and $201 million. So it's not looking very good for the Walt Disney Company, for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It looks like this film is going to be another massive box office bust for the Walt Disney Company this year.